most of the theme that seems like that we're talking about Jews here in this show, but we're talking about the Pharisees and the difference between average Jewish people and the sect that we call the Chabad, which is connected to the Pharisees. So again, as a disclaimer, a mitzvah, or a good deed, some people like to say, but according to Jewish law, it is a mitzvah, a religious obligation to provide this information to every Jew in the world in order to protect the Jewish children from Chabad and save Jewish lives and souls from being destroyed by Chabad. Chabad, of course, has been known for kidnapping Jewish children for at least 60 years. It's a known fact amongst all Jewish rabbis. And separating children from parents to brainwash them in their schools and day camps and yeshivas and youth groups, this is all part of the programming. All right, jumping into right back where we were with the show, we were at VTB Bank. This is a Russian bank, of course, and right now it's 61% state-owned. But it was founded in 1990. It has $214 billion in assets, and its chairman is Andrei Kostin, Kostin, and I'm going to remind everybody to take notes if you haven't been. These guys have branches everywhere, including Kiev, Ukraine. There's also a branch called the Guta Bank, Guta, and it's under sanction by the USA, as is this bank. But their connection to Donald Trump, and of course, is through Felix Sater. And money that they sent to Sater in the millions was supposedly for funding for Donald Trump's Trump Moscow operation, Trump Tower Moscow. When Andrei Kostin was interviewed by Mueller, of course, this is a bank that's under sanction. And Mueller wants to know what was the money for. It was for Donald Trump. This is what he claims. Donald Trump claimed that he never dealt with these guys, bottom line. What was going on was these people were acting as intermediaries, or let's just say trying to develop policy regarding Syria and the Ukraine with the State Department. So they were using these economic incentives to try to actually gain favorable policy. So basically what this is called was strong-arm diplomacy. What happened was the Treasury leveled new sanctions on VTB Bank. So when they didn't get what they wanted out of this bank, they leveled sanctions. This is something we're going to see a lot. We're going to see people, issues, entities that are attacked because they didn't cooperate with either a government institution, a corrupt government institution, a bank, or one of these mobsters like Sater. It's a really good example of that. One of Trump's major financial connections is, of course, Steve Weinberg, who's Jewish, of course. And it should be mentioned, of course, that he was born in Connecticut, which we know is kind of a pedo state, and he went to the University of Pennsylvania, which we know is a pedo state. He owns all those casinos in place, but let's look at some of the casinos he owns. Let's see: Frontier, Golden Nugget, Mirage, Treasure Island, Bellagio, Beau Rivage, The Wynn Macau. Okay, this is in China, and that's important. And he also works for Prince Albert in Monaco with their, it's the QD International Hotels and Resorts Director. That's what he is. He's the director of the QD International Hotels and Resorts. Now, bear in mind, guys like this sort of came out of nowhere when Vegas was going through this huge resurgence. And when people talk about that resurgence, they like to think back and say that's when the mafia was being kicked out and the big corporate money was coming in. But when they say corporate money, what they're really talking about is big Jewish mafia money, big Russian Jewish mafia money. That's what was going on. And Steve Wynn and all these guys was highly closely connected to that. Basically, he made all this money during the 90s when the so-called resurgence was taking place. There's quite a few things that are important to remember about Steve Wynn. He was, from 2017 to 2018, he was the Republican National Committee Finance Chairman, personally selected by Donald Trump. They gave him the job under Donald Trump's request, even though he gave money to Obama and Harry Reid prior to that. In 2018, though, he was busted for sexual misconduct. and he had to step down as the CEO of Wynn Resorts, as well as this chairman of the finance committee. He had to quit that too. But right now, at least here recently, he's the vice chair of Donald Trump's inauguration committee, along with such other notable people as Sheldon Adelson, Anthony Scaramucci, Woody Johnson. He's a former UK ambassador, Rick Sembler, another former ambassador, this guy to Italy, and a guy named Rick Ruffin, who is the CEO of Treasure Island, who runs Treasure Island. One of the things you got to look at with these guys, where you can see some corruption, is like, first of all, he's got that big giant casino in Macau. Okay, that's where they do the gambling in China. And one of the things he's doing right now is he's trying to get Trump, this is something he's doing right now, to send this guy named Gao Wengui, Wengui, back to China. And this guy's another damn billionaire, and he's been in exile in New York since 2017. And he's got this big company called the HNA Group, or the HNA Group sued this guy, whatever, and that's usually how it works. Is somebody gets somebody sues him, and then the State Department comes down. But this Wang Yi guy is a good friend of Steve Bannon. I should mention one more thing before I move on. These guys, I'm going to tell you guys about Steve Wynn and Donald Trump have a history together. I mean, first of all, Steve Wynn he's always given his money to the Democrats, just like all these guys. You're going to notice the pattern here. All these guys give their money to the Democrats, but Steve Wynn had lawsuits against Trump. First happened when Trump opened Taj Mahal. He went and stole some executive from Steve Wynn and gave him $1 million starting package, and obviously Steve Wynn sold him from that. And then at another time, Donald Trump hired a private detective, a detective out of L.A. called Luis Rodriguez, former LAPD detective, and he was trying to get this guy to spy on Steve Wynn. And for whatever reason, Donald Trump ends up suing Steve Wynn, saying that he corrupted his spy, got him to turn around and start spying on Trump instead, turned him into a double agent. But when they asked the LAPD guy, Luis Rodriguez, what happened, he said that he had a change of heart because of Trump's immoral, unethical manner. Of course, in business, he liked to cause financial harm. That's what he said. He couldn't work for this guy. Then there's Sheldon Adelson, of course, the other big casino guy from Boston, his Ukrainian, Lithuanian Jews. And that's interesting because, of course, Ukrainian, Lithuania is the hotbed for, Lithuania is where the Zionists and the Bolsheviks came from. And, of course, Ukraine is the home of the Russian mafia. But anyway, Sheldon, of course, is worth $26.5 billion. And I forgot to mention that Steve Wynn is worth $3.4 billion, probably a lot more. I guess Sheldon doesn't hide his money quite as well as Steve Wynn. He owns the Sands Casino, which, of course, was torn down in a convention center, but that was a big deal because that's where all the old mobsters used to hang out back in the day. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. He built the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore, which is the third most expensive building in the world. If you don't know anything about the Marina Bay Sands, you ought to check it out. It's awesome. It's got this ridiculously huge swimming pool on the top of this skyscraper. But like I said before, you don't get to build stuff like that without having these governments make deals and having all sorts of mafia connections. And it should also be mentioned that at this casino that he's got here, he was actually in trouble with the National Jewish Democratic Council, who gave him crap because they say he approves of the prostitution at the Macau resort. He also owns the Venetian Vegas, the Venetian Macau, of course, the Cotai jet boat, which is a big jet boat that goes between Macau and Hong Kong. And this Cotai is something you should know about because that's a big development coming up in China. When we get to the China money laundering involving, well, it's kind of like one of the almost final destinations of all this stuff. They're trying to develop this big giant casino complex in this place called Cotai in China off of Hong Kong. Kind of like the complex that Donald Trump was trying to build off of Moscow called Crocus City. So you got to remember, whenever you see something like that, these big mega building projects, especially things involving skyscrapers with casinos and hotels, money laundering. But we also need to remember Sheldon here is very anti-two-state solution. He's also very anti-pot. He wants to nuke Iran. He calls the Palestinians invented people. He also hates internet gambling. Gee, I wonder why. And he has a fleet of jets at Ben Gurion Airport, including an Airbus 340, 500 that set a world record here recently, flying from Hawaii to Ben Gurion Airport nonstop. Oh, and get this, he did pledge $100 million to Trump, and he also gave $100 million to the Republican Jewish Coalition. But before he gave his money to Trump, he had a big thing at this meeting at this Jewish Coalition thing where he had all the candidates get there and state their cause, and they decided to give the money to Trump. Anyway, I could go on and on about the Republican candidates, but there's so many other guys. Okay, here's a guy, Senator Tom Cotton. You know, you've probably seen him. He's relatively young. He's a American veteran. But anyway, I believe his mother is Jewish. Now, his mother's name is Bryant, and I know that you think, okay, we're looking for these things. Tom Cotton is a Methodist, but technically he's Jew, so he falls into that crypto-Jew category. Anyway, he graduated from Harvard Law, and of course he was in the Army in Iraq, and in 2005, and in 2010 he went into the reserves. But when he was in the Army, you think, what did he do? He wasn't a grunt in the trenches. He worked in Reconstruction. He was the operations officer of the Provincial Reconstruction Team. That's what he was. And bear in mind, this is the guy that took $1 million from Israel to promote war in Iran now. He also voted to block any lifting of any sanctions on 4 particular Russian companies, just 4. And he's also very pro-Magnitsky Act, but he's also anti-China, which is bizarre because that makes him seem kind of naive when you consider who he's working for. But he also introduced a bill against online gambling September 26, which suggests that he's getting money from Wynn and Adelson, etc. Okay, so we definitely see a little bit of a conflict of interest here, especially with Donald Trump owning 3 casinos. But he's also he's up for consideration for possible Secretary of Defense or even CIA director by Trump. There's another guy here, born in Oklahoma, and his name is Michael Calvey. He's in jail right now. He's innocent, but he's a Russian investment banker and the founder of Bering Vostok, which is a Capital Partners Group, and he was the head of that, of course, from 94 to 04. But he was arrested in 2019 and accused of fraud by none other than Atem Avetisyan, and trust me, these are different people. That's Avetisyan, a friend of Putin. Okay, now when they threw him in jail, he went into the same jail that Sergei Magnitsky was thrown into, the same prison where he died. And he also had the same detective, Karpov, that Magnitsky had, friend of Putin. Here's a guy, another Jew, Boris Nemtsov, Nemtsov. Now, this is, I guess, might be a good guy, you could say. He was born in Sochi, Russia. He had a Jewish mother, but his family baptized him Orthodox Russian. That was, something they did. Now, this guy wasn't stupid. He was a physicist. He was the former deputy chairman of the government of the Russian Federation, and he also, there's a whole list of things that he did, but he was one of the people responsible for bringing capitalism to the post-Soviet Russia. He was a major ally of Yeltsin, who we should probably be talking about if we haven't already. But he was the Minister of Fuel and Energy in 97, which is interesting because so much of the controversy and the money is swirling around fuel and energy, so certainly he had the potential to be an enemy of somebody. And he was also the Vice Premier of the Security Council between 97 and 98, which certainly would give him a little bit of power that Putin might not like. And he was a Vice Speaker of the State Duma, which is like, Speaker of the Assembly or Speaker or whatever head. That's pretty high up there. And he was head of the Coalition for Russia Without Lawlessness and Corruption. So certainly he was very, very anti-corruption. And get this, you guys, in 2012, he started the Republican Party of Russia. Well, he was arrested at least 3 times in 2007, 2010, and 2011. But in 2015, February 27th, he was shot. I believe he was shot in Moscow. And, of course, a lot of people were very upset about this. They all blamed it on Putin. But they say that he was shot by a team of Chechens. And one of the members of this Chechen hit squad was a Chechen officer who's close to none other than Roman and I can't pronounce his name either, but Kadyrov, who is permanently the strongman head of Chechnya. Here's a fun one, Marita Butina. She's a Russian spy, otherwise known as Red Sparrow, and her handler is a guy named Alexander Torshin, who's very, very close to Putin. As soon as she got in trouble, of course, he bailed. But one of the things they did, though, is they were very pro-gun. And she was involved with efforts to set up pro-gun groups in Russia, very similar to the stuff that we have in this country. And she also had one in this country, the Right to Bear Arms group. She's the founder of that. This one woman right here has had 101 Trump contacts. That means whatever, electronic contacts, whatever, including 28 meetings, face-to-face, sit-downs. She served 18 months in prison, pleaded guilty in 2018, just a little while ago, for a conspiracy to act as an unregistered foreign agent. And remember, before I move on, I'm just saying this Right to Bear Arms thing, it's all funded by this billionaire called Konstantin Nikolaev, Nikolev. Oh, but here's another fun little thing. Marina here is dating Paul Erickson, a former Mitt Romney advisor. There's all sorts of fun little intrigues going on with these spies. Sex. Oh, Stephen Cohen, this guy's directly connected to Trump, of course, right? Well, not exactly, but anyway, he's a Jew, of course, but he's a poor Jew, New York Jew. But he also went to Pennsylvania University, Penn State, or whatever it was, all those, we already covered that. We'll talk about it again. Anyway, this guy's worth $12.8 billion. He's a hedge fund manager, SAC Advisors, LLC. They're based in Connecticut and New York. Fun places. This LLC this trust fund, had $14 billion in equity. He was one of the people that this guy, Preet Bharara, tried for insider trading. But unlike all the others, he got away with it. And yet, this is one of the most profitable insider trades in history. And the reason why he got away with it was because he blamed the employees. Oh, yeah, he's also a contributor to Chris Christie. He gave Chris Christie $2.5 million. And he's part of a charity called the Robin Hood Foundation, which is what they refer to as venture philanthropy. So-called charity. It's like venture capitalism or venture whatever funding, only it's a charity, supposedly. And let me see, who's on the board of that charity? Hey, Harvey Weinstein's there. So is Lloyd Blankfein. Let me see, who's he? Goldman Sachs. Yeah. Oh, who else? Steve Wynn. Good old Steve Wynn. Looks like he also sold a Picasso to this guy Cohen. The thing is that this Picasso, before it ever made it to Cohen, Steve Wynn put his elbow through it. Now think about that. When you got a couple of billionaires and one of the billionaires puts an elbow through the painting, you know what that means? That means it was a fake painting that he put his elbow through, and the real painting is somewhere else, and they got an insurance payoff. And you know why you know that? Because later on, after the guy was originally going to pay, and this is Cohen guy, was originally going to pay Steve Wynn $139 million for this painting, but after the accident, price went up to $150. How does the price of a master go up after somebody puts their elbow through it? By, $11 million, unless there's some sort of fraud involved. Steve Wynn, I think, Cohen has $1 billion in art, including a sculpture of a head made from frozen blood. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds a little weird. All right, now when we talk about Ponzi scams and con men, there's no way you can talk about that without talking about the biggest Ponzi scam that we know about of all time, which, of course, was Bernie Madoff, another Jew from Queens, New York. And the only thing is, this thing is his Ponzi scam, which stole $64.8 billion. That's a ridiculous amount of money. Only came from Jews, rich Jews. He preyed on rich Jews. Now, remember how I told you about the Chabad and the Pharisees? That's what they do. They prey on Jews. That's what this is. Now, Bernie Madoff wasn't just some cheap-ass con man. He created NASDAQ. Okay, he created a computer program that became NASDAQ. There's a few other things that it should be mentioned here when he got busted. Before that happened, he donated heavily to the DNC, including Charles Schumer, Chris Dodd, and Eli Wiesel. He also had a few insider deals because the people that were supposed to be watching over them, the SEC lawyers that were supposed to be keeping an eye out for this stuff, one of them married, a guy named Eric J. Swanson married Madoff's niece. That's a little bit of a conflict of interest. He must have known because this case came up after he was married to this woman. Of all the people that got ripped off in this $64.8 billion scam, there was one guy, this accountant lawyer guy named Jeffrey Pickauer, another Jew from Palm Beach. He took $125 million, invested it with Bernie Madoff, and made like about $80 million really quick, which any accountant would know was impossible. Next thing he did is he pulled out his $125 million and left the $80 million in there. Okay, so that means that the only thing he had in that account left was illicit gains, because the initial equity capital, the principal that he put in was removed. That's like gambling, and you make a little bit of money and you take the money you started with and you put it back in your pocket. Well, that's what he did. Well, anyway, he made $7.2 billion off of that $80 million that he left in there. And then he pulled it out right before the crash. You know, he got to keep the money. And everyone said, hey, you got to give the money back. And he's like, oh, no. He had a really good lawyer. Mysteriously enough, of course, he died in 2009. They found his body in the bottom of his swimming pool in Palm Beach. And all that money that was left, at least $3 billion of it, went into his foundation, JPB Foundation, with assets of $3.7 billion. And guess who's running that? His wife. Now, what do you think? Where do you think that money is going? I don't think I need to tell you. But it should be mentioned, though, that in jail, Bernie Madoff is being protected by other jailmates who are Italian mafia. So why would the Italian mafia be protecting this guy that only stole money from the Jews? I'll tell you why. It's because, as you're going to see here real soon, it's payback. Because, like I said here in the 90s, the Italian mafia got taken down by the Jewish mafia, by people like Rudolph Giuliani and stuff like that. But we're going to talk about that. Okay, here's a guy, Roman Abramovich. I can pronounce his name. He's from Lithuania, but he's a Russian-Israeli, of course. He has dual citizenship. Now, he has a company called Millhouse LLC, run out of Chelsea. He's very close to Boris Yeltsin, 96, and he's also very close with Boris Berezovsky. And there was a famous meeting that took place in the Caribbean. I believe it was on Boris Berezovsky's yacht. We'll talk about him real soon, with another guy named Peter Avon. Now, this is in the Caribbean, remember, so we've got these three Russian billionaires on this yacht in the Caribbean. Remember, let's see, who's in the Caribbean? Epstein, Vesco, all that stuff going on. This is in 92, 96, remember. This guy's got $12.9 billion, making him, because he's got the dual Israeli-Russian citizenship, the richest man in Israel. This is not a slouch here. Come on, richest man in Israel. He's also number 11 richest in Russia, number 140 richest in the world. The guy's donated at least $2.5 billion to Russia. He's our number one philanthropist. So he's an interesting character. And of course, Boris Berezovsky, his name is spelled Berezovsky. He died here in 2013. When he died, he was worth about $3 billion. Another, just your basic Jewish oligarch. He was also a very big friend of Yeltsin in the 90s, very close friend, and also opposed to Putin in 2000. Okay, he died in 2013, but in 2000 he was very opposed to Putin. He was involved in the Russian Academy of Science and the Russian Security Council, and he also owned Channel 1, which is like the biggest TV station over there. He was sued in London I guess he had a deal go bad with this Roman guy, and that might have had something to do with their boat trip. But Roman is an oil producer for a company called Sibneft, Sibneft. These guys are big oil producers. But anyway, that company's worth about $3 billion at least. Boris here said that he was co-owner of the company. And of course, if you've got back deals and you give somebody money to buy a company, and then the guy says, "What money? What are you going to do?" Okay, but again, remember, we're talking about mobsters. They have no honor. There's no honor amongst these people. They screw each other left and right. And I did mention he was Jewish. Anyway, Roman is funded by, there's a group that he funds. Let's see, it's a political party called Unity. Or this is Boris. Yeah, Boris did this. Boris funded this party. He created this political party. And this is the party that provided the parliamentary base for Putin. You don't have to wonder about that. But anyway, he was found dead in Ascot, Berkshire, and he was hanged. This is March 23rd, 2013, and the coroner ruled it an open verdict, which obviously means they are not convinced it was suicide. Here's a guy, also Jewish, of course, Mother Orthodox, but that makes him crypto-Jew still. But his name is Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Khodorkovsky. He's worth about $15 billion, but after a big falling out he's only down to $500 million now. But he's a good guy, which is probably why he's lost so much money. But he used to own Yukos, Yokos, which is an oil firm in '92, a huge oil firm. And he acquired this firm for like $309 million, which is an example of what happened in the 90s when these guys were able to buy up these state assets for pennies on the dollar. And of course, anybody who was connected to Yeltsin was able to really cash in. But unlike other oligarchs, this guy was different. He wasn't hanging out at the Monaco and having with all the prostitutes and all that. This guy actually did some work for the country. He wasn't having he didn't have a yacht and all that. But he did start an import-export bank, and he opened the foundation that had Kissinger as a trustee, which is interesting. Now, in 2003, Yukos merged with Sibneft, the oil company. I believe Boris took control of this in 1995. It should also be remembered that this guy is very anti-military military and security services, so certainly that's not going to make him a friend of Putin. And in 2003, on TV, he argued with Putin about corruption. That was in February of 2003. And he claimed all government people were bribed with millions. Millions was being used to bribe all the government people. This is what he said on TV to Putin in February 2003. By October 2003, he was arrested for money laundering, but supposedly this is one of those oligarchs that turned into a good guy, I guess because he's only got $500 million now. He's not really an oligarch anymore, but he became a freedom fighter while he's in prison. So now you see him speaking out all over the place. Here's another fun pair of Jews, Simon and David Rubin. These guys were born in Mumbai, India, but they're actually Baghdadi Jews. That's Iraq. They made their money in scrap metal. But right now, they control 5 to 7% of the world aluminum output. Okay, they went from scrap metal to aluminum dealing. There again, you're going to notice that a lot of these oligarchs are heavily into aluminum and all of these commodities. But they were sued by Oleg Deripaska. This suit was outside of Russia, but anyway, it was a big deal. It was for billions of dollars. And I'm not going to get into that other than to say that, well, all right. Well, Oleg, of course, we're talking about Oleg. Oleg is the second richest guy in the UK in 2019, I believe. That's weird. No, maybe they're talking about Simon. Okay, I apologize for that. Okay, I'm going to go into a little bit closer now with some of the Trump people and get back into their connections with Felix Sater, which is a little bit more like the whole Mueller nonsense. But speaking of Ivanka Trump, now we're not going to go into a whole lot of stuff with Ivanka Trump, but we are going to look at some of the meetings that she was involved in with Felix Sater, okay, because obviously she claims that she didn't have any meetings with Felix Sater. Now, of course, all of these meetings involving Felix Sater had to do with the Trump Tower project in Moscow, because Ivanka, of course, her job with the Trump operation involves often interior decorating in all these new projects. So any new project like this would have certainly had her in the advisory position at the very earliest stages so that she could begin the planning and was ever necessary to do that job. She actually was briefed, according to Felix Sater, at least 10 times regarding the Moscow deal, because when he did this, when these guys work, and remember, this is inside of Trump Tower, so nobody sees what's going on, but when these meetings took place with Sater, it was with all of the Trump team, Donald Jr., Eric, Ivanka, and their attorneys. Typically, they just take a little elevator ride downstairs and go to Sater's office and have these meetings. Now, bear in mind, Ivanka is saying that she didn't know anything about any of this stuff and she wasn't involved. This is her testimony. Now, Michael Cohen, who was involved in these meetings and I believe is in jail right now, he has an attorney, a guy named Stephen Ryan. And there are emails between Cohen and Stephen Ryan discussing Ivanka wanting Cohen to lie about her involvement. This is evidence. This is all out there. Remember, these guys went to jail because they claimed that these negotiations for the Trump Tower Moscow ended in February 2010. Okay, this is the big thing. This is the big thing that Mueller used to send all these guys to jail, Manafort, Cohen, etc. And the thing is these negotiations with Sater and Bayrock went on longer until June. Big deal. Okay, that's what everybody's in trouble for, not for any of this other stuff. Sater also arranged for Ivanka to sit in Putin's private chair in his private office in the Kremlin in 2006. When they were over there somewhere doing their Russian business over there with Putin. He hooked her up. She went, oh, I want to sit in his chair. Anyway, Ivanka says she doesn't remember. But it's possible. Of course it's possible. It's like, come on. I don't remember, but it's possible, I guess. Sure, anything's possible. And her hubby, Kushner. Let's talk about Kushner just briefly, okay? Anyway, Jared, who's a hardcore Chabad Jew and still a lifelong Democrat, he always was a lifelong Democrat, as is Ivana. He's worth about $2 billion at least. And remember, they're hiding their money, so when they say $2 billion, you know damn well it's a hell of a lot more. He got rich pooling other people's money to do his stuff. Remember, his father, Charlie, did time for illegal donations to the Democrats. There's a couple other connections here that are kind of serious, but before I get into that, I just want to remind everybody just how Zionist this guy is. He's a major Chabad donor. He's not just a member of Chabad, he's a major Chabad donor. He's a total Zionist. He backs, not only does he back building settlements in the West Bank, he's funding them. And yet, Donald Trump is trying to pass this guy off as a peacemaker, someone who's going to somehow help him negotiate. And how are they supposed to negotiate with this evil guy that's giving money not only for West Bank settlements, but the Chabad? That's like flat out saying, I mean, come on, he's investing his money in building structures on land that they're supposed to be negotiating, giving back. Kushner is a slumlord. His dad was a slumlord. They own 10,000 properties, and I'm not talking good properties either. It should also be mentioned that Kushner family are very close with Netanyahu. His dad, Charlie, the one that did time for the illegal donations, big friend of Netanyahu. All right, they've got a lot of other friends too. One of them is a guy named Leviev, Leviev. And this guy, Lev, has got a daughter named Chagit, Chagit, who's really close with Ivanka. And she's got this corporation called AFI Retail. Her and her dad, Lev, run this corporation, AFI Retail. I guess it's pretty big, but it occupies the old Times building on West 33rd Street. It's a big deal, apparently. But this guy, Lev, is also a huge donor to Chabad. Very, very big Zionist. Oh, I should also mention about Kushner is that one of the things he invested money in after his dad went to jail and he took over was the Observer magazine, which is a very, very liberal rag, which promoted Obama and liberal causes for its entire existence. And this magazine is funded by none other than George Soros. So, something's wrong there. Now, just to be fair, let's talk about Ed Medzvinsky, and this is of course, the father. Ed did one term in the Iowa legislature, but in 2001, he had 31 felony fraud charges. Okay, again, this is the father of Mark, the guy that married Chelsea. Isn't this interesting how the fathers of the women or the in-laws of the president are these damn cons and spend time in prison? But see, that was in 2001 he did that. He got busted for bank fraud, mail fraud, and wire fraud, and he stole $50 million from his hedge fund. Okay, remember, hedge fund, that's a scummy thing to be involved with anyway. But supposedly, and this is what I think is bullshit, is he said he lost that money in a West African scam, like a Nigerian 419 scam. Come on, can you believe that? He said, okay, where's that $50 million? Oh, I gave it to a guy named Mohammed in Nigeria that said that I was going to inherit, that I was going to get another 100 million. It's like, oh, are we supposed to be that stupid to believe that? Anyway, he was ordered to pay $9.4 million in restitution, which really isn't shit. Ed also, we should mention, the father of Mark, was the chairman of the Pennsylvania Democratic Party, 1988. Now, remember we were talking about Pennsylvania, everybody in the government are pedos. I could go on and on here, but I'll just say that one of the things that happened here was that Mark, who's married to Chelsea, of course, Satanist, they've been trying to get Ed out of jail, and they were lobbying Bill Clinton to do this. Bottom line, Bill said no. There's all sorts of other stuff involving Hillary. Like there's one thing here where Hillary, who caused, let's see, what is it? She's always there to cast the one vote to screw somebody up. In this case, she screwed up this person, Marjorie, who was connected to Ms. Vince, the family here. Okay, here's an advisor to Trump, Carter Page. He was born in 1971. He's a relatively new young guy. Jewish mother, born in Minnesota. He went to Catholic school. Jewish mother, but he went to Catholic school. He was a lieutenant, Navy intelligence. He worked CIA and NSA, and he went to Georgetown. He worked with the NSA after that, and he was a member of the Council on Foreign. He had a Council on Foreign Relations fellowship from NYU. Okay, so in other words, the Council of Foreign Relations paid for him to go back to NYU so that he could study his national security studies to get up there in NSA. What did he do? He ended up going to work for Merrill Lynch. Now, what is a Navy intelligence guy studying with the NSA and Council of Foreign Relations going to, what does that have to do with Merrill Lynch? Well, working for Merrill Lynch in London and New York, he dealt with Gazprom, Gazprom, which is a massive, massive Russian corporation. I think they actually are responsible. They were founded in 2008. They're a global energy capital company. What else can I tell you about those guys? There's a couple principals, a guy named Sergei Yatsenko and another guy named James Richard, who doesn't sound like a Russian. But anyway, that was founded in 2008. One of the things that they did, they pushed a lot of business between Russia and China, and they were very big involved in the transition. But they've also got connections to the mob in the 88 Queensway group, we suspect. But the thing is, though, is that Carter Page, as his advisor to Trump here, okay, remember, this is NSA guy involved with Merrill Lynch, Gazprom, and a big China connection, possibly big China mob connection. Not only that, he was a Russian intelligence operative in 2013, okay? All that went on. And he was Trump's foreign policy advisor. But Trump says he never met him. It's like an echo. We hear that so much. Okay, that friend of Kushner's, Leviev, big friend of Yeltsin, billions of dollars. He's an Uzbekistan Jew, and he's extremely big on Shabbat and a friend of Netanyahu. Let's see, but I believe he made a big deal with Jared Kushner's dad for several millions of dollars, and Ivanka was actually involved in that. I believe this guy's a Trump donor, but he had a diamond company called Siebel, Siebel. Now, why is that important? Okay, remember, this guy is Chabad, as all can be. That means he's one of those guys that with the big long beard and the black hat. Now, when you think of diamonds, you think of those guys with the long beards and the black hat carrying around those briefcases with diamonds. That's exactly what we're talking about. This is the #1 jewelry chain in the Netherlands. Amsterdam, remember? Netherlands? These guys were major diamond traders. Major. Unfortunately, they've also been accused of involved trading in blood diamonds, meaning diamonds that come from war zones like Namibia, Angola. This guy was the king of Ascorp. That's a huge Russian diamond conglomerate. But anyway, this Siebel operation, this retail jewelry store, is a 100-year-old jewelry store. Okay, 100 years old. But in 2013, under the leadership of this guy, they declare bankruptcy. Now, what happens right after that? It becomes Moscow Jewelry Factory. And Moscow Jewelry Factory is another company that was the buyer, angel buyer, that came in with and bought the company for pennies on the dollar after they supposedly went bankrupt and said, we'll take over your operations. Don't worry, we'll save your jobs. You've heard that before. And then they find the money that was missing all of a sudden. And guess what? Moscow Jewelry Company was a company owned by the same Lev Levayev, who's also a major, has major interest in gold mines and diamond mines. That's a little bit of a monopoly there. He mines the diamonds, mines the gold, makes the jewelry, and sells it retail. Wow. He's definitely connected to Putin. He's definitely connected to the Chabad. He's definitely connected to the chief rabbi in Russia. He also gives money to settlements in West Bank. And he owns a company called KP Mineira, Mineira. This is a security company. And this security company was built to provide security for mines. Remember, we're talking about mines in war zones, blood diamond mines, so we're talking about guys with machine guns. This is not a nice thing. This is like Intertel that was set up by Vesco, who we're going to talk about soon. The company that owns this KP Mineira is part of the Queensway Group, but its chairman is Feng Hung Lo, who was also involved with Airbus and HSBC Bank. And she is a major Chinese military, Chinese Ministry of Intelligence operative. She's spy, government. There's at least 2 or 3 of these guys that are really big. But that brings us to the Artfield Group Limited, Ltd., which is a big export company located in Bermuda. And it's chaired by Lo Feng Hung. Anyway, she moved the operation to the Queensway Group, and she bought out Lev Levayev's interest. And Lev Levayev's company was called the Africa Israel Investments Limited, the Russian company. Isn't that interesting? Africa Israel Investments. Now we're going to show you that all this laundered money ends up in Africa, going through China. You should be seeing that very soon. But anyway, this company, Artfield Group Limited, $1 billion in New York real estate, was sold to Artfield 1 week before its acquisition of AFI USA. That right there was a violation of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, SEC. It's just like our stuff. This happens all the time. And one of the buildings that they bought was the J.P. Morgan building. Isn't that interesting? I should also mention that this company also owns like 49% of Tanzanian Airlines. Now, remember what I told you about these mobsters wanting to own airlines? This makes it really easy to smuggle stuff. There's also some other fun things that they're involved in here. I'm going to get into this Queensway Group, but there's another company called China Sonangol, Sonango, and this is part of the Queensway Group. We're going to talk about that quite a bit. Actually, the Queensway Group, I'm only going to give you a brief analysis because it's just too darn big. I may have to do a whole show just talking about this Queensway Group. But one of the companies, their major shell companies, is this Sonangol, which is Sonangol. And one of the things that's interesting about this company is that they do a lot of business in North Korea and Russia. They're also connected to the Angola National Oil Company. Now, why would they be connected to that? Because the laundered money goes into buying infrastructure projects that generate oil. Oil is real money. So if China wants to own all the oil coming out of Angola, they're going to use stolen money to buy it. This is what this is all about. But they also own Bank of China, Kelley FR, which is another bank, Wing Hang Bank, which is Hong Kong. And these guys have given billions in loans to these guys, this art build group. It should also be mentioned that they're connected to another company called CS Wall Street LLC. Okay, now don't let the name fool you. It's a Chinese company, CS Wall Street. Sino Wall Street, I think is what it probably stands for. It's got some really fun Israel connections. Let's see, there's a guy, Herzenfeld and Rubin are connected to it. It's kind of obvious. Now, one of the bosses of this 88 Queensway group is a guy named Sam Pa. Now, the Sam Pa goes by all these different names, a.k.a. he's like, they call him Zhu Jingwan, Zhu Swang Ha, Sao Muk Si, Samo, Sam King, whatever. He's got a ridiculous amount of names. And not only does he have a ridiculous amount of aliases, AKAs, but he has passports for each one. How do you get that? Obviously, the only way you get that is you are working for the government. And again, we're just going to skirt over this because it's just so thick. Many of the people in Queensway Group are associated with the People's Liberation Army. Norinco is involved. They're very heavily involved with Lev Levian, of course, obviously, in Tel Aviv. And Lev, of course, his big thing is diamond smuggling. Now, when you see those guys, like I said, in the airports, those Orthodox Jew-looking guys with the black suitcases and all that, those are filled with diamonds. And typically, I think we'll probably go over that here real quick, but I believe they move like $8 million at a time when you see those guys doing that, flying back and forth. And of course, these diamond couriers are never being searched. So it's not just diamonds going back and forth. It's also cash, drugs, who knows what. But they're smuggling. This is a major smuggling thing. Now, it should be mentioned also that a lot of the money that's going into Angola from these Chinese companies is being done in a way they call it oil-backed loans, which means that we're going to loan you money, but you're going to back it with oil. We want to get your oil production or rights or so many barrels in return. But the other thing that they're doing in Angola, which obviously isn't cool, is they're selling arms. Russian arms, obviously, Chinese arms, obviously. Norinco is involved in this company, so certainly Norinco arms are going there. But they've already provided these guys with at least, and I'm talking about just Angola now, at least 30 billion in diamonds. Now let me tell you one little trick here remember I told you about these guys smuggling these diamonds. This is what they do with these diamonds. They'll take really, really good, high-quality diamonds, and they will soak them in tea, and that will make them brown or so-called blacken the diamonds. And then when they smuggle them, they go, oh, these are black diamonds, they're not worth anything. And people go, oh, okay, and they get away with it. But that's one of the things they do. But bottom line, this 88 Queensway group is the syndicate. Now let me just tell you a little bit more real quick before we move on. The name 88 Queensway Group came from a street in Hong Kong. It was an area of Hong Kong near the waterfront that was primarily, for many, many years, occupied by the military, the royal military presence over there in Hong Kong. And of course, when they moved out, they left this real estate. It was developed. Now, when they developed it in such a way very similar to some of these developments we're talking about with these skyscrapers and what have you. It's kind of like that Russia thing. So what they made, in other words, one of the things that they did was they created a building that acts sort of like Trump Tower, and it's called 88 Queensway Group because that's the address. And in that tower, that big skyscraper is occupied by all these shell companies and all these mobsters and syndicate people and government people and spy people and all that, so that when they can operate just like they do in Trump Tower, they can do it all within the privacy of one elevator going up and down from different floors. Nobody sees anything. They've got a private elevator. This is what mafioso do. They all move into one building. It's the same thing that Al Capone did. One of the things they did also when they developed that little street is they built a huge brand new police complex for the Hong Kong police. Now think about that for a second. The mob built the police station. I don't know, do you think maybe they have listening devices built in? At the very least, But that shows at the very least also that there's certainly corruption within the Hong Kong police, and they're in bed and indebted to this Queensway group. Now, in Russia, obviously there's quite a few syndicates, and as we've said earlier, most of these syndicates now are connected to Chabad. I didn't really go into it too much, but historically speaking, they became one and the same here some time ago. But this particular syndicate, and I'll do my best to get the name right, is called the Solnetsevyskaya Bratva, and Bratva, of course, means mafia. But they're from the Solnetsevo district of Moscow, and that, of course, means sun or something of this nature. But these guys are directly protected by the FSB, or the former KGB. And as we said, they're very, very heavily connected in the United States because of the Chabad presence in the United States, which is obviously mafia. You think those are synagogues. No, they're not synagogues. They're mafia places pretending to be synagogues. But so their headquarters in the U.S. is in Brighton Beach, obviously, and they also have another one in Atlanta. And Atlanta, of course, they are very heavily into the cocaine business. But the head of this syndicate is a guy named Sergei Mikhailov. He's also associated with another guy named Viktor, Viktor, Averin, Averin, who comes up in all this Trump stuff. These guys have been doing this stuff for quite a while. One of the things they did that was kind of interesting was they tried to kill Simon Moglievich in Prague, at a big party in Prague. And it didn't happen, of course, because somebody snitched the whole thing out, and the police went there and raided it and arrested all these people. There was all these hookers. I think they busted them. They had like 80 hookers or something like that, ridiculous amount of hookers. But Moglievich didn't die. But anyway, this guy was arrested in Switzerland, and he walked. And, of course, the witness for this crime was shot, so I guess that had something to do with him walking. He's very heavily Ukraine mafia, obviously. He's very closely connected to another mafioso named Gafur Rakhmanov, who's Uzbek. They're sort of fighting the Chechen mafia. That's the thing. This mob is fighting the Chechen mob, which is interesting because they used the Chechen mob to assassinate people. When they came to Brighton Beach in the 90s, they took control of everything. And naturally, when they moved into Atlanta, they had to get hooked up to the various different cocaine cartels to get to do that. But remember, these guys, they made their money in the 90s primarily in banking, 90s banking, remember that? And their primary function, or his primary function, has been a money launderer for Israel, or using Israel to launder money. But anyway, when they moved into this cocaine business in Atlanta, they had to hook up to this other gang called Kuntera. But before I go to that, I was going to tell you really quick about this Gafur Rakhimov guy. He was born in Tashkent, or he's from Tashkent, and everybody knows this guy's a criminal. He's a famous drug dealer, and he got famous before he became a big drug dealer. He was a boxer, which is sort of interesting because you know how these boxers, they become enforcers. This mob that these guys hooked up to so that they could deal with the Medellin cartel was called Kuntera Karunana Mafia Clan. And these guys are the bankers of the mafia. These are La Costa Nostra's bankers. So in other words, these are the guys that did the banking for the Italian mafia, and they are primarily based in Sicily. But they also are very heavily in not only just Italy, but also Canada and Venezuela, which is interesting. Okay, they're very closely connected to Carlos Andres Pereira, who was the president of Venezuela. And these guys are very big heroin dealers. And when you remember the French Connection, that was these guys. They also own 60% of the island of Aruba, which is a territory of the Netherlands. Okay, think about that. Caribbean island, territory of the Netherlands. What do you think they're doing there? Okay, they're very closely connected to the Rizzuto crime family in Quebec, the Bonanno crime factory, and their big thing was, of course, bringing cocaine into Canada. They're also very close to the Corleonesi mafia clan, which I assume was the inspiration for the Corleone clan in the Godfather movie. And naturally, of course, the Solenskaya Bratva mob in Russia. Very, very important. But you see, right away, I want you to see the connection between the Russian mob, Israel, and the Italian mafia, and the Medellin cartel, and the South American drug cartels, which, of course, are very closely connected to Robert Vesco, who we'll be talking about, and the entire operation, which was formerly, remember, when we talk about the Italian mafia, we talk about people like Lucky Luciano, who basically was the guy that lost everything to Robert Vesco. His operation was taken over, and that, of course, is the operation that was involved, that got money directly from the Rothschilds, as well as George Soros, as we're going to discuss. But bottom line is I'm trying to show you that the CIA and the NSA and Ollie North and all those guys, Iran-Contra, it's all connected. Here we have a guy, Kirill Dmitriev, from Kiev, Ukraine, and he's the CEO of the Russian Direct Investment Fund. He's got some fun partners, but they're heavy into railroads, diamonds, and they're they're partners in Gazprom. But they're also connected to Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, and another company called BlackRock, which is a JP Morgan operation with 6.5 trillion in assets. This guy is a Harvard grad. He's so closely connected to Goldman Sachs, it's ridiculous. He's also connected to Eric Prince of Blackwater. He had some important meetings with Eric Prince that are extremely controversial and have a lot to do with connections with Donald Trump, because Eric Prince, of course, was working as a conduit or liaison to Donald Trump. And Blackwater, of course, as we know, is an evil corporation that is a mercenary group that is Jesuit, and we know what the Jesuits are. Now, here's an organization that's very closely associated with Donald Trump, and I see it all the time in the QAnon group, and I never allow this stuff in. And I'll tell you why right now. And this is the organization called We Build the Wall. This is a 501c charity nonprofit group out of, it says New Mexico, but they're really based in North Dakota. And their real base is a company called Fisher Industries in North Dakota. Now, these Fisher Industries guys has got like 3 brothers that run it. They're primarily sand and gravel. But one of them in particular, Tommy Fisher, is a regular on Fox News talking about the wall, because they've got this We Build the Wall thing going, which of course is a building the wall on private land using donated money from the GoFundMe. And this guy's also a major donor to the GOP and Donald Trump, who is pushing the Army Corps of Engineers and Homeland Security to give the wall contract to Fisher. Fisher Industries is giving a ton of money to Trump, and Trump is lobbying the Army Corps of Engineers and Homeland Security to give these guys the job, in spite of the fact that the steel wall design that they put out to meet the requirements did not meet requirements. Okay, they failed. Couple things we should know about this We Build the Wall. Some of their major advisors are Eric Prince of Blackwater, you know, that guy that was representing Trump in the Middle East with those Russian guys. Steve Bannon, a guy named Tom Tancredo. Here's another one, Chris Kobach, another Trump advisor. Anyway, this guy, Chris Kobach, is directly connected to Fisher Industries. Now, Fisher Industries wants to charge $12.5 million per mile. That's $208 million. It's $3.3 billion for 218 miles. Now, what could go wrong, right? All right, let's look at some of the primaries of this Fisher Industries. Of course, we mentioned Tommy is a major contributor to Fox and GOP, but what happened to him? Company Fisher Industries got busted for tax evasion, including 169 air quality violation citations for their cement plant. One of the brothers here, well, that was in 2009. One of the brothers, who used to be the primary or the owner of the company at one time, he got busted. His name's Michael Fisher. He got busted for felony tax fraud. conspiracy to defraud the USA. Yeah, that's somebody we want working for the USA. You don't think somebody that was involved in a conspiracy to defraud the USA would, like, I don't know, defraud the USA again? You think, maybe? Oh, and then there's another Fisher called David Fisher. This is a good one, Mr. Trump. David Fisher was found guilty of child porn in 2005, and he was released in 2010. I think he served like half of his sentence. He shouldn't be getting out until 2020. You think maybe somebody might have helped him get out of jail? You know, somebody that might have, I don't know, got a donation? I mean, that's how that stuff works, right? That's why they give the money to people. Well, here's another advisor and donor, Jewish. His name's Gary Cohn. This guy's a good one. You got to watch this dude. He's a liberal Democrat. He still is. He's in line to be a replacement for Janet Yellen at the Fed Reserve. And before that, though, before he started being an advisor to Trump, he was a Goldman Sachs risk manager. Now, as a risk manager for Goldman Sachs, he was the one that told Goldman Sachs, hey, the economy's going to crash, short sell the USA, which they did. And they made $8 billion. That was in, I'm sorry, did I say 8? I meant $18 billion. That's Goldman Sachs made $18 billion off of us losing money, our economy going down. They took $18 billion out of our economy as it went down. That was in 2007. Anyway, he was a risk manager from 2006 to 2016. He was paid $20 million a year. Now, here's something you need to consider. When he went to join the Trump team in 2016, he took a severance package from Goldman Sachs of $285 million. Now, who do you think he's still working for? Do you think he's working for Donald Trump, or do you think he's working for Goldman Sachs? He is now Trump's national economic advisor and the one responsible for writing the tax reform package for Trump. He's all about trickle-down economy again. And you know what else? He's the guy responsible for the world record deficit that Trump has right now. Here's another fun guy that you guys like to idolize. William Bill Barr, the guy whose dad gave Epstein the big job at Dalton College. Well, William Barr's father is a Jew, but William went to Catholic school. Well, I think that makes him a crypto Jew. Anyway, he was CIA from 73 to 77, okay? What did he do at the CIA? He was a China analyst. You don't think that had anything to do with the 88 Queensway group, do you? Now, bear in mind also, Barr and Mueller have been friends since the 80s. And in 91, 93, he worked for Bush. And in 82, 83, he worked for Reagan. Anyway, in 92, he was all about more prisons, and he's a big supporter of the death penalty. He's also a big supporter of phone taps on civilians. And this was before 9/11. He was the guy that told Reagan to pardon Caspar Weinberger for his Iran-Contra offenses. I don't know. Do you think maybe it's because he's got something to do with the NSA, because he's connected to Vesco, because he's connected to Epstein? Well, sure looks like it. And he argued, this is one of the big things about this guy, Barr, you got to remember here, is that he likes to argue. He has a philosophy that says that the president should have complete authority to stop law enforcement proceedings. In other words, if somebody's being busted, one of his cronies, the president should only have to wave his hand and that guy's suddenly free. Now, that sounds a little bit like, I don't know, something you might do in a dictatorship or a royal thing. Well, anyway, this guy, William Barr, appointed this guy named John Durham, who was a former U.S. attorney of the District Attorney of Connecticut. Now, Durham here is also Jewish. He has some history of fighting crime and racketeering, but before that, he spent 2 years on an Indian reservation. What the hell was he doing on an Indian reservation for 2 years before he went to work department, State Department or whatever it is in 1989, the chief of the criminal division? Now, during that time, he prosecuted all kinds of mafioso in New Haven, Connecticut. But, you know, funny thing is all the mafia he went after were all the Italian mafia, a reoccurring thing. Now, let's not forget that Connecticut is where the little Maria, 12-year-old Maria, you know, the little Puerto Rican girl that got kidnapped by the, let's see, who was it? Genovese clan, New York Mafia, went to Connecticut to kidnap, human traffic this little girl from Millhaven, Connecticut, to take her to the Epstein home, the Wexner estate, so that Epstein and Trump could screw her quite a few times. Another thing that's sort of interesting about this John Durham guy is that Eric Holder appointed him to investigate CIA torture. Where do you think that's going to go? I wanted to talk about Roger Stone, but there's so much to be said about him. But let's just say for now that he's a GOP hitman. He's an extremely sleazy guy. He's extremely pro-Russian, which isn't bad. But we know that this guy's satanic. Now, his connections to Nixon, of course, are not Nixon, but Trump is through, well, Cohn. He's connected to Cohn. I mean, Cohn, Trump's old gay mob attorney, introduced Trump to Roger Stone. And Roger Stone, of course, was the bagman or the bad guy for Nixon. But I wanted to draw a connection with him because he was the guy responsible for working with Alex Jones to recruit Patrick Moore to try to take out our group by having Patrick Moore recruit that Kai Irwin idiot to essentially set up the Mayflower group to try to infiltrate our movement. And of course, these guys are connected to Rick Messina, who we're going to talk about also. But I want to talk about Cohn real quick, that mob attorney, obviously very Jewish. This guy hung out at Studio 54. He was a regular there. He wasn't just a regular there. He was screwing the guy that owned the place. But anyway, he died of AIDS. And he was a mob attorney, but he was a mob attorney. Fat Tony is the guy that we associate with him the most. And this, of course, was the guy that was very involved in human trafficking, probably the guy who delivered the little girl to Trump and Epstein, because that's what they did. They were human traffickers. But Trump Tony was also, I'm sorry, not Trump Tony, but Fat Tony Salerno was also very heavily into the cement business. I'm not sure what, CFR, something cement, whatever, concrete. But he poured all the concrete for Trump Tower as well as quite a few other projects, probably Soho and what have you. But Cohn wasn't just an attorney for Trump. He was a friend and mentor. Trump totally depended on him. And after he hooked him up to all the 5 families in the New Jersey, Connecticut, Chicago, New York, and Philly area, that's not even counting Vegas or Detroit, or Kansas City, or any of these other big mob places, he got turned on to quite a few other people like Sater. This is when he met Sater. Now, these are all guys that are operating out of Little Odessa in New York. He also met a guy named Bogatin, Bogatin, and I didn't even get to him because there's a couple of Bogatins and they're very big, but one of the other people he met, and I'm saying when Donald Trump met this guy, this is the Don of all Dons. This is the big giant boss again, and that's Simon Mogilevic, Moglevitch, who's of course wanted. But these guys were all dealing with Donald Trump, and of course he also at this time met Jeffrey Epstein. Now, just a quick review of Roy Cohn's connections. He started out working for McCarthy, who of course was a very anti-communist zealot. And after that, he went to work with Richard Nixon, who of course is where he got the connection to Roger Stone. But he was working for Vesco. And of course, Nixon was very close to Vesco. As we know, his nephew was the bag man that delivered money, Don Nixon. We'll talk about Don too. And Vesco, of course, got his money from the Queen, who gave it to the Rothschilds, who funneled it to a Geneva bank run by a guy named Georges Carlwise. Now, of course, that money came from the Club of Isles, but this Carlwise also gave money to Soros. And these people are all connected to Trump. Now, here's another guy that's really closely connected to Trump, and that is Rudy Giuliani, America's mayor. Now, I don't know how this guy ever got to where he is, because his dad, Harold, did time in Sing Sing for felony assault and robbery. He worked for the 5 families doing loan sharking and gambling. He was a mob enforcer. Do you know what mob enforcers do? You know what kind of clients they have? people involved in loan shark. This is a guy that broke legs and killed people. This is Rudy Giuliani's dad, who did time in jail. Now, I'll tell you something about Rudy. Obviously, I've been looking to see if there's any Jewish connection because, they hide this stuff. Now, Rudy's pure Italian, but he's so pure Italian. He's pure mafia Italian. You go back in his family, it's all mafia. He's always been Italian mafia. Scary, crazy stuff. And yet they put him out as a mob buster, federal prosecutor, mob buster. Now, here's something that you should know about Rudy. He had 2 military deferments from Vietnam. Why? Because he worked for a judge. He was like a law clerk working for a judge. And this judge said, oh, no, his work is so important, he must stay here. He did that twice. And here's the other thing about Rudy Giuliani. He's a chameleon. He's not a Republican. He's never been. His mother says he's not a Republican. He's never been a Republican. He was a Democrat. In 1975, he switched to independent. Why? I don't know. Had something to do with Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. But he was also a private attorney, independent, during the Carter era. In December of 1980, when Reagan came along, he said, wow, time to switch to the GOP. So he's in it for political gain. That's it. And speaking of political gain, when he used to arrest people, he'd go after these really high-profile people, and then he would drop the charges. But he would have show perps. He would make them do these humiliating perp walks, like these big Wall Street cases. He'd make these guys, he'd put them in cuffs and have them walk off the trading floor crying. Some of these people that he tried to, obviously all the cases he did were to further his career, but he did go after Boesky and Milliken, who are corporate raiders. And that's interesting because this is what all these guys are involved in. Now, I should mention, though, and I'm going to set this up. And you guys, I hope you're paying attention because this is the most incriminating thing involving Trump and Rudy Giuliani that we have to date right here. And the very fact that Mueller didn't say squat about this shows you how corrupt Mueller is. But I told you about these shell companies in Amsterdam. Well, Trump's attorney, 2018, set up a company, his law firm set up a shell company for Bayrock, that's Sater's group, called Kazbay, Kazbay, BV. There's another company set up at the same time called Bayrock BV, which was another shell company connected to the Bayrock group working out of the Trump Tower. So why would his law firm be involved in doing this? Why would Trump's attorney be setting up a shell company in Amsterdam to funnel money from New York through Bayrock to a Bayrock subsidiary shell company in Amsterdam to another Bayrock subsidiary that's fake called Kazbay that was set up by Rudy Giuliani? Why would he do that? Well, guess what? All that money goes to China because right after that, it leaves Amsterdam and it goes to the 88 Queensway Group. So there you go. Now, I'm going to depart a little bit Mueller-type stuff only because there's just so much to go around. We're going to talk about Jeffrey Epstein. Anyway, what can we say about Jeffrey Epstein? We've said so much, but we got to talk about him a little bit more just to tie things back in together. But obviously, he's a money launderer. We know he runs the Pedo Island. His clients have to be billionaires minimum before they can even deal with the guy. He started his career, of course, or his life started at Dalton School, and he got hooked up by Barr Sr., and he took over this Vesco operation, of course, which was Lucky Luciano. When Lucky Luciano ripped off the $500 million, Vesco ripped off that much money from Lucky Luciano. This was the nut that was used to set up all these operations in the Caribbean as well as the Medellin cartel. But he actually owns the island Little St. James in the Caribbean, which is just a quick little boat ride to every single one of these other little islands that does all this banking. So he doesn't just provide financial services, he does all the banking for all these people. And the list of people that bank with Jeffrey Epstein is top secret, and it has never been seen, and no one has ever audited this fund that he supposedly runs. And people think this guy's worth like $2 billion, but it's probably, come on, you think the guy that does all the money laundering for everybody is going to be reporting his money? I don't think so. But obviously, he's very closely connected to Trump, no matter what anybody wants to say. he was a major partner with Trump in this money laundering thing. And as far as the Mueller's investigation is concerned, money laundering should be the main issue, because if you start going after the money laundering, you'll see that it's not just this one individual Trump money laundering, although he was instrumental to everyone else doing it through this New York conduit, which was a major part of the money laundering train. But the thing that we always remember about Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein's liaison is their mutual affection for young girls. And as we mentioned earlier, when we talked about that one guy, Hoffman, who is the former boss of Jeffrey Epstein, he also was famous for molesting little girls. But now he's going after Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, remember Tower Investors? He's got that Wham company that's run by the guy that owns LinkedIn, and they're going after Epstein now for $475 million. But anyway, people, this guy, I mean, come on. He's got at least 20 Jane Does, 20 that he has paid off. There's 3 active lawsuits against him right now. I think one of them just dropped right before the election, so we assume that somebody was paid off because Trump was one of the defendants. I've got this, and I mean, if you guys want to continue, we could do this another time, but I've got all the legal proceeding documents for every single Jane Doe. It's incriminating why none of this stuff is public. These were not just having sex with little girls. These were violent rapes, including with death threats involved and violence to get them to comply and do these things. And this is why one of them had to die. Little 12-year-old Maria had to die, because it gets the other ones to cooperate. She was only 11 when she was kidnapped on March 19th in 1993 from Waterbury, Connecticut. Lovely place. I think we're going to talk about Connecticut too here in a little bit. Yeah, I kind of pushed that to the back because I want to talk about these mobsters a little bit more. Let's never forget that Steve Bannon confronted Ivanka over one of the Jane Does, a girl named Katie Johnson. And when Ivanka says that there's got to be a special place in hell for somebody that would molest and, I don't even want to say murder, a little girl like that. And Steve Bannon says, yeah, well, what about that 13-year-old, huh? That accused your dad. But we're not going to talk about Acosta acquitting Epstein and becoming labor secretary. I mean, that should be obvious that there's some serious, and all these idiots that go, oh, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Come on, how many enemies do I need to list that are close to him? Have you guys not noticed that all the donors and all the advisors working for Trump and pretty much everybody on his administration are Jewish yet? Have I made that clear yet? All right. And when I say Jewish, I'm not talking about Jewish people. I'm talking about Chabad. Now, before I talk about Robert Vesco, I'm just going to mention again real quick the Club of Isles, that $10 trillion mob fund that's owned by Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. But that money is funded through the Rothschilds. So when you say the Rothschilds run it all, no. They're servants. When we wrap all this up, I'm going to show you what's really going on here. But even the Rothschilds had to use this Geneva bank, this Carl Weiss guy, to give money to Soros and Vesco. But this is also how they give the money to the Bilderbergers, who send it down to people like, Kerry Cassidy and what have you, that like to spread it, people like that, the little people. And of course, Vesco is completely connected to the Medellin cartel, the CIA, the NSA, and Entertel, and the Contras. He probably was also responsible for having killed Kennedy. Vesco is just some guy from Detroit. Now, supposedly he died in 1971. There's a guy, another CIA guy named Frank Turple, and he says that Vesco did not die. He says that he went to someplace else. Oh, he says he went to Sierra Leone. But he was arrested by Castro, and of course Castro could have very easily turned him over, but obviously nobody wanted him. Nixon certainly didn't want him, because if he came over and anybody from the Justice Department that had any credibility or wasn't corrupted got a hold of this guy, they would have blown up the entire thing. Everyone would have gotten busted. And I'm just going to do a real quick synopsis again about Vesco and Resorts International, which was the company that owned one of the casinos that Donald Trump was CEO of after a while. Donald Trump was actually CEO of one of these mob companies right here that was controlled by Vesco. And again, just a quick history, it was all set up by this Mary Carter Paint Company, which was just a BS front for the CIA. And again, it was set up by so-called mob busters because Dewey, John Dewey, former New York governor or mayor, whatever it was a prosecutor at one time, just like these guys. See, it's the same thing. You know, you go back years, they do the same thing. And that was the guy that busted Luciano and made it possible for this CIA company to steal all Luciano's money. There's other people that this guy was involved in that you guys should be aware of, and one of them, his name is Carlos Lehder, Lehder, and that's another CIA guy, and also very responsible for setting up drug cartels as well as lots and lots of terrorist activity. You know, the kind of stuff that Ollie North and Reagan was involved with the Contras. And you also need to understand that Robert Vesco and this entire syndicate that he was involved in that was so close to Nixon, so close that Nixon's nephew actually was his number 2 man, was completely connected to Clinton and Bush. When Clinton was governor and Bush was vice president, they were running tons of cocaine into Mena, Arkansas. Clinton was a complete coke addict, total sloppy coke addict. Everybody knows this. So there's that incestuous thing. So when you think, oh yeah, that Clinton was this big mafia guy that ran everything. No, he was a stupid idiot that couldn't keep his nose out of the supply. He was a damn hillbilly compared to the rest of these mafioso we're talking about. Remember, Clinton's not Jewish. Should tell you something. Anyway, we could talk about all the different countries that he was involved in Central America, but basically anything that has anything to do with the drug barons or the various different insurrections involving El Salvador, Nicaragua, etc., all had to involve these guys, including Mexico, and including guys like Carlos Slim and Carlos Salinas de Gortari, Felix Arellano, or the Arellano Felix gang. All these gangs, they're all connected. Now, again, as I mentioned, there's this guy named Frank Terpil, Terpil. He was CIA until 71. He was also from Brooklyn, and he went rogue. Now, when he went rogue, he joined up with Robert Vesco. They became partners. He was also arrested in Cuba like Vesco, but his big thing when he went rogue was he sold weapons, he sold poison, mercenaries, what have you. He lived in Lebanon for quite a while, and he was very pro Yasser Arafat, pro PLO, which is interesting. He also sold weapons to Gaddafi and Idi Amin, which is interesting because you're going to see other people very closely connected to conservatives like the Reagan-Bush administration that are also selling weapons and working for Gaddafi. Now, he claims Vesco did not die. He claims Vesco went to Sierra Leone. I believe they say that this guy's dead also, but I think he faked his death also. I want to talk a little bit about Don Nixon Jr., Don. And, of course, Don Nixon Jr. has a special place in my heart. Well, actually, I should say he has a special place in my brother's heart, but I'm connected. But he's the guy that recruited my brother and me to work for the Ollie North gang. Well, we were told it was CIA. It turned out to be NSA. Anyway, his dad was Don Nixon, the brother of Nixon, okay? Don Sr. And he was one of the people that was having money funneled to him to Nixon from Vesco. Okay, and there were other people, of course, involved, like B.B. Rebozo and what have you. But Roger Stone was definitely involved in this stuff. And when you look at Roger Stone, again, it should be mentioned, his attorney is none other than Tyler Nixon, who is the son of Don Nixon. Okay, so Robert Vesco's number 2 man, his son, is Roger Stone's attorney. I'm sure there's no mafia stuff going on there whatsoever. And when you consider that Roger Stone is the dirty tricks man, you know, sure he's pretty dirty. If you've seen, I don't have to tell you how dirty he is. You just have to look at him. And, of course, these guys are connected to Cohn, who's connected to the Gambino and Genovese family and Fat Tony Salerno, et cetera, which connects them to Trump. And it was supposedly money. These guys were involved with getting Trump to bribe John Anderson to run as an independent to dilute the Carter vote and help Reagan get elected. That's not something you're going to hear from anybody, but obviously it was necessary to get Reagan in there in order for the NSA to do all the fun stuff that they wanted to do. Carter he wasn't exactly one of those team players. I should mention, though, that he did go to jail with Robert Vesco, and one of the reasons why they put them in jail is because they were involved with a so-called AIDS drug. And if you heard Skip Zion, who was on my show a little while back, he mentioned that this AIDS drug was more like something like essence of lilac. But what they don't really understand, I think this is the thing that Nixon didn't understand, is that this stuff, it's not really, I wouldn't say homeopathic, but they have programming probably attached to the original samples. So this guy probably had something that completely didn't work. Another interesting character is a guy named Sir Robert Allen Stanford. This guy's from Texas, but he was knighted. But he started the Stanford Group in 1992. It's worth something like $40 billion. But he was convicted in 2012, and they gave him 110 years. He ran the Bank of Antigua in 1981. Now, the Bank of Antigua was the largest employer for Antigua and Barbuda. It was pretty large for the area. It was based on St. John's, just a stone's throw away from Epstein. Okay, remember, this is in 1981, okay? Just a stone's throw away from Epstein. Anyway, this bank has branches in Venezuela, Panama, Ecuador, and Colombia. Okay, what a perfect bank for dealing with drug dealers. Great places. He also was involved with the Antigua Barbuda Investment Bank, or ABI. What happened was he got busted for this ridiculous fraud. They gave him this 110 years, and it pretty much crashed this bank. And it was taken over by this Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. That's the Central Bank of Eastern Caribbean, which of course isn't all the Caribbean, but it's a large portion of it. And they had to basically tell everybody, don't take all your money out and all that sort of thing. It was a pretty big scandal. That bank has since been combined with another bank, and it's now called the Eastern Caribbean Amalgamated Bank. I guess the central bank dropped it after a while or sold it off, and once they fixed everything up. But it's interesting because this guy Stanford, his attorney is a guy named Brandon Sullivan. Now, Brandon Sullivan is an interesting guy because he was also the attorney for Oliver North. Well, that's interesting. Here's this guy, Bank of Antigua, got the same attorney as Oliver North. Wow, you don't think maybe they're, I don't know, connected? I guess so. He was also the attorney for the FBI. When the FBI had that shootout in Ruby Ridge and they killed those, citizens, well, they had 4 of the snipers, the government snipers that killed the Americans, were represented by this Brandon Sullivan. I could go on and on about these people that he represented, but that should draw a quick and obvious conclusion that that's what's going on here. Okay, let me see. We're getting down to the end, folks. I just want to see if there's anything I need to talk about real quick before I get into the extraneous stuff. We already talked about uranium-1. I didn't really get to talk about Rosatom. I probably should. But there's a couple other interesting people. I'm going to talk about some of before I do that, okay, remember Patrick Moore I mentioned? He was the guy that was recruited by Roger Stone to recruit that, Kai Irwin idiot to start up the Mayflower Group. Well, this is the thing about Patrick Moore, and this is why this is interesting and why I should pay attention to this guy, is because his father was good buddies with Alex Jones in Texas, who's closely connected to Roger Stone. So it was between those two people, Alex Jones and Roger Stone, that they got this guy Patrick set up as kind of a junkie idiot frontman for a bunch of groups, such as, I should mention before that he was a failed actor. But this is the guy that basically was like a big spokesperson, frontman for the Occupy movement, a big proponent for the legalization of pot movement. You see him with all sorts of people like Ron Paul and what have you, trying to promote that. And he was also the guy that was the organizer for the anti-Hollywood pedo march, which we found out, of course, was a big scam that was being bankrolled and run by this Satanist dude, out of Encino called Rick Messina, who we're going to talk about real quick. Rick Messina, of course, is a Satanist lord. He thinks he's a deep, big magician. But when Kai Irwin tried to take out the QAnon group, we traced him back to Alex Jones and Roger Stone and Patrick Moore and Rick Messina. And then that's when we found out that Rick Messina, Hollywood talent agent who runs the Happy Lizard Bar out of his home, was all into human sacrifice and satanic rituals. And he has a tunnel entrance under his home that goes to the Getty through the Skirball Center close by, which is a mega Jewish center. These are all big things, because obviously I'm busy trying to track all the entrances to these homes, but I'm working on this Trump stuff right now. But we'll remember that this guy, this Hollywood talent agent, he does mostly comedians. Okay, remember how Sater's girlfriend was that failed comedian who was also involved with mind control? Let me see. He uses a couple of his clients are Tim Allen, Drew Carey, and here's a guy, Patton Oswalt. Remember him? Total pedo. Stella Stolpen. That was the last comic standing one I was telling you about. Anyway, this guy's totally Satanist, Jewish, Kabbalah, pedo, connected to Alex Jones, Roger Stone, and Patrick Moore and the Mayflower Group and Kai Irwin. Now, the home next to him, bear in mind he's probably dead already, but right next to him was a home owned by a Netflix executive that he actually owned, but it was under this Netflix executive's name. We all know how Netflix is. And both of these homes shared a big old giant concrete backyard, and in his yard he had a wiffle ball court. Wiffle ball for children to use. And right behind his house is a big water reservoir with lots of green belt for hiding bodies. Now, we suspect that right after we found this guy out, that he sold the house and dumped it and may have fled to Israel. This is what we've been looking at, and we suspect that the tunnels have also been, under his house have been filled in, the general area. He may be dead, but we definitely think that he's connected to the McMartin preschool thing, and we know for sure he's connected to Cynthia Beck. Here's another fun guy who's sort of connected to all this stuff indirectly. He's one of these big donors, but his name is Ron Burkle. He's actually from Orange County. He's divorced, had 3 kids. He's worth about $1.5 billion. He made all his money in grocery stores. He's got this company called Ukaipa Company, LLC. Big friends with junk bond guy Michael Milliken and Berkshire Hathaway. That's Warren Buffett. But he's also a co-owner of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, this guy's a gay pedo. He's gone gay pedo. He donates to Hillary, Al Gore, Bill Clinton, John Kerry, Cory Booker, Terry McAuliffe, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, how does that fit in there? Arnold Schwarzenegger. Interesting, huh? Bill Clinton gave this guy a job as he was a senior advisor to Bill Clinton for investment funds. He was also a member of the J. Paul Getty Trust. How about that? But he moved from Beverly Hills to his new place where he lives, without his wife and kids, of course. He's divorced now. He lives over Black's Beach. And if you ever been to Black's Beach, hey, Oceanside, you know what Black's Beach is, right? Let me tell you, I've been to Black's Beach. I got a stingray bite. I'll never forget that, but it's a nude beach. And no, I wasn't nude. Cynthia Beck, let's talk about her real quick. She was born in Fallbrook, California. That's not too far from Black's Beach. She's Gordon Getty's mistress. She has several houses all over L.A., and you remember that one that had the gun bust? Well, we know for sure it's got tunnels. They're connected to the Playboy Mansion, Angelina Jolie, Charlie Chaplin, Jared Leto, the Getty Center, the Skirball Center, UCLA, Edwards Air Force Base, Warren Beatty, James Caan, Jack Nicholson, Kirk Douglas, Donald Sutherland, W.C. Fields' old house, and all the Hearst properties, as well as Vandenberg Air Force Base, home of the secret space program that Trump likes to talk about. And just in case you didn't know, this woman was Gordon Getty's mistress, and when he hung out with her, they liked to use cocaine and watch really sick videos. And I hate to tell you guys, but he had 2 daughters with this woman, Gordon did. But, they had kind of a nasty breakup. They say that when Gordon would hang out and come over, because he didn't spend a lot of time, obviously he didn't spend a lot of time. He's Gordon Getty. He had 2 families. But they say that when he did spend time with his daughters, which he had 2 of, he only hung out with them one at a time. He never took them both out at the same time. He'd only hang out with one. Doesn't that remind you of the president with his daughter all over his lap all the time? Here's a guy, Alan Weisselberg. He's Trump's chief financial officer for the Trump Organization. He's also Jewish. He was offered immunity many times for this Mueller stuff because he's Trump's the chief financial officer, meaning he signs all the checks. Now that means he signed the checks that went to Cohen as well as Stormy Daniels. Okay, you can't hide that stuff. One of the things he used to do was give money to a guy named David Pecker who ran the National Enquirer. And they had this campaign they called Catch and Kill. He would pay them to catch stories about Trump, negative stories, and to kill them. Can you imagine that? Paying off the tabloids not to say anything. Here's a guy, Matthew Calamari. This guy's pretty powerful in Trump's organization. He's the executive VP, chief operating officer. That's pretty high up there. And one of the things that this guy does, or at least he's been charged with, is inflation of assets. In other words, they cook the books all the time to make the stuff look more valuable than it is. Remember that pump and dump scam I told you about? That's what that is. You make it look like it's more valuable than it is. This is what they always do. Trump is always saying that his stuff was worth more than it is. That's standard. This guy's been, caught doing that. But then the time that they don't want to do that is when they reduce it for taxes. They go, oh, taxes. Did I say it was worth that? No. That's not what it's worth. Here's another Jew that works for Trump named Lieberman. He's the executive VP of subsidiaries like modeling, real estate, and golf. Golf, like those golf courses Trump runs. Well, here's a fun story about the Palos Verdes golf course that Trump bought here not too long ago. What a fun little job. I didn't even realize that was close to me. The 18th hole of the golf course literally fell into the ocean. It's on a bluff on cliffs, and it overlooks the ocean, obviously. It's beautiful, but they had some erosion, and they had to have some major, they needed a lot of help. Well, a portion of the land that is used to do this golf course is owned by the Palos Verdes Municipal Unified School District. And Palos Verdes isn't a big rich, obviously there's a lot of nice houses there, but it's an itty bitty little tiny community. Tiny, right there on the coast off of LA. Anyway, when Trump took over this property, he sued the school district over the value of the land that the golf course was leasing. And the first thing he tried to do was when he took over the land and it was time for him to start paying the bill to the school district, he waited until the bill was due before he said, no, I'm not going to do this, and he sued them. The school district did not have any money. They were poor. It cost them like $100,000 to deal with Trump in this lawsuit, and that's a salary for 2 teachers. The thing that's interesting about this is that there was an attorney, a guy named Smith, and he was the school district attorney. He was representing the school district, and of course, he didn't get along with Trump. He didn't like Trump. He thought Trump was arrogant. He thought Trump was an arrogant asshole. Trump thought he was an arrogant asshole. Who do you think was really the arrogant asshole? They tangled, and it got to be really ugly. Eventually, the Smith guy went on to become a judge. Not just any judge, but he became a judge for the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, how many of you Trump people have heard Trump complaining about the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and how they shot down this or they shot down that? Why do you think the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals hates Trump? Because the judge is this Smith guy that Trump called an asshole on TV. When this golf course opened to the public, when it was supposed to be a happy, happy day of celebration, asshole Trump had to take that advantage of that situation on TV in front of all the cameras to tell everybody what it was like having to deal with that arrogant asshole Smith. Can you believe that? Couldn't keep his mouth shut. Now, this guy was a judge, too. when he did that. He was, at this time, you got to understand, he didn't just call Smith an asshole when Smith was the attorney for the school district. He did it after he became the judge for the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. No other president has ever talked about a judge like that. Never. What responsible president would call the judge of some court like that that's going to be able to have the power to shut down things he does an asshole? That is just plain stupid. And not only that, but he was a very bad neighbor to the people around that place. He thought the homes, remember, we're talking about $1 million homes. He thought they were ugly. He said, your house is ugly. My customers shouldn't have to see your ugly house. And then what did he do? He planted trees. He planted ficus trees. You know, ficus trees, they grow really big. He planted them all along the perimeter so that all those homes up there on the bluff overlooking, the edge of his property, this golf course, suddenly those homes that were, people pay to have a view that looks out over a golf course. Those, think about that. And the golf course asshole put trees to block that view, big old ficus trees. And they sued, those homeowners sued. And during the process of the mediation, to where the various attorneys had to go meet with the homeowners, Trump would go to the homes. He'd walk into the homes of these people and he'd say, your home looks like shit, or something like that. He'd totally insult them. This is the place, you hear that story about, oh, Trump, he's such a great American. I hear this all the time in the conservative circles. They talk about the flagpole incident, how Trump put up a flagpole, 70-foot tall flagpole, and the city said, wait a minute, you don't have a permit for that. What the hell's wrong with you? And he said, yeah, no problem. So what did he do? They told him, he said, well, your flagpole can only be like 50 feet or something of this nature. So he said, okay, no problem. So he cut 20 foot off the flagpole. But what did he do? He increased the height of the ground by 20 feet. I mean, what a dick. That's all he does is try to get around stuff and sue. That's what Trump is famous for, suing. We're pretty much done, but I was going to talk about Uranium One. I don't want to do that. Instead of talking about Uranium One, reviewing all that, because this is so much included in everything, I'll remind you real quick about the 9/11 Commission, okay, because we're comparing it to this Mueller investigation. But remember, $15 million was spent on the 9/11 Commission, and it took 20 months. The Mueller investigation was $6.8 million. But the thing is that the 9/11 Commission came up with a result, and the result was there was a failure of imagination preventing the U.S. from detecting Al-Qaeda. That was the result. All that money, all that investigation, just like everything I read you, if you were having to go through all this information and come up with a result. Okay, Mueller had the same sort of thing. He had a result too. What was Mueller's result? Okay, now remember, think of everything we talked about, all these people, and all these people I've mentioned to you, there's a lot more that I haven't mentioned. Think about that. Think about all the things I've told you. Mueller knows about all these things, and yet, what was the result? The result was they had no credible proof that Donald Trump committed any crime. That was it. And we say when it committed a crime, remember, the crime that they were looking for, not any other crimes, but this is the crime they were looking for, was whether or not he worked with Putin to interfere with Hillary's effort to become president. That's what that was all about, which was negligible and tangential at the best. If the Mueller report was all about investigating corruption and money laundering and the use of illegal foreign agents, et cetera, things would be different. But I'm going to end it. But before I do, I just want to talk real quick about some other real winners that I don't want you to forget about. Like Larry Silverstein, who leased the trade towers for $211 million and walked away with $15 billion. Michael Chertoff, another Jew, a rabbi, 9/11 conspirator, second Homeland Security guy, Chertoff Group, B of A chairman, put body scanners in the airports from an Israeli company. Total conflict. Worked under Bush and Clinton. Special counsel for the Whitewater investment investigation. Whitewater. He invested Whitewater. That's a conflict. He wants to, this is Chertoff. He wants to waive all laws that the Secretary of Homeland Security deems necessary, such as environmental laws, so that the border wall can be built. He's very big with the border wall. He worked in New Jersey as a prosecutor the same time Giuliani worked as a prosecutor in New York. Supposedly they worked together, going after the Italian mafia, obviously protecting the Jewish mafia. Oh yeah, his dad was a rabbi. And speaking of rabbis, how about Rabbi Dov Zakheim, dual citizen of USA and Israel? Wonderful guy. 9/11 architect, worked under Reagan, Clinton, and Bush as a foreign policy advisor. Isn't that interesting? He went from Clinton and Bush, no switch. Very, very conservative, runs a heritage foundation. After 9/11, he was a conspirator, of course. He went to work for Booz Allen Hamilton as a VP. I don't think I need to tell you what that company does. In 87 and 2000, he was the CEO of a company called SPC, and they'd make advanced weapon systems. Wonderful, huh? He's also a professor at the Yeshiva University, the National War College, Columbia, and the Trinity College, which invited him to be a special scholar. What the hell is the Trinity College doing with a Yeshiva University guy there? That's kind of a good illustration of how screwed up these conservative Christians are when it comes to dealing with Shabbat. Now, let's not forget, real quick before we end this thing, I want to remind you about how all these guys went to Penn State, that university famous for Jerry Sandusky, who molested 10 boys and had all that special treatment when he went to trial. Okay, the entire state. It was shown during his trial that the state police, the court justices, and all the state prosecutors had child porn on their computers. And when the Attorney General, the Democratic Attorney General, Kathleen Kane, found that, they went after her ass. Do you think they would go after all those state police and justices and all those people with child porn? No, they went after her and said, that was what you did was illegal. So I can go on and on and on about that, but the reason why this is important is because Bill Cosby was just thrown in jail for what he did recently. And the woman that did the prosecution, of course, was doing an advocacy wash because she's a total pedophile enabler, and by humiliating and prosecuting this one guy, Philly native Bill Cosby, she can make it look like she's a total pedo warrior, but she's obviously a fake pedo warrior. We know that because she blocked just about every investigation into who was involved with Sandusky. But let's just remind everybody that this woman that did all that, she goes to the same synagogue as the Netanyahu family. And let's not forget the state of Connecticut, especially the city of Waterbury, where the city council, if you call anybody in Waterbury and say, hey, what's up with that little girl, Maria, that got kidnapped from that pizza parlor, Nash's Pizza Parlor, when she was 11 or whatever, they'll say, oh, you got to talk to our attorney. They have absolutely no interest in pursuing this. The police have no interest. Why is that? That's because it's totally mob controlled. So don't expect a city that's controlled by the mob to help out in any of these investigations. Oh, here's a couple guys I want to talk about. Two more people. These guys, we got to go back a little bit, but because of who they are and how much damage they did to our country, how could I forget them? And one is Robert McFarlane. Now, Robert McFarlane is an Israeli-Iranian stooge. And this is interesting. I really want to get him in here because he illustrates the conflicting desire to support Iran by Israel. Even though Israel says all these terrible things about Iran, we know that Israel has a history of supporting Iran because of the Iran-Contra. It was basically sending weapons from Israel to Iran. But believe it or not, Robert McFarlane is a Jew, even though you won't find that information anywhere. Think about it. Come on, Seth MacFarlane. Now, this guy, all throughout his terms of everything he did, obviously he was involved with Reagan, but he was very closely connected to Henry Kissinger. So you got to take a very close look at anybody connected to Henry Kissinger. But he had always had an agenda to establish contacts with Iran, always. And one fun thing that happened during this whole business with the Iran-Contra stuff is that he helped set up his pipeline to ship Israeli weapons to Iran. They didn't come from Israel. They came from places like Argentina or what have you. Obviously, they'd move it around. But there was a plane that crashed in Soviet Russia in 1991, and it had Argentine students on it that were going for some soccer thing or something in Israel. But when the plane crashed, they noticed that the cargo of the plane was loaded with weapons, probably why it crashed. It was overweighted or something like that. But they were American weapons, and the plane was chartered by Israel. Now, when this happened, there was clearly a weapons conduit had been going on. This weapons conduit had started prior to 1980, prior to Reagan taking office. That means it was right during the time that Jimmy Carter was there and that they were doing the Iran negotiations. So there you go, right there. That one little thing there probably was very helpful to getting Ronald Reagan in office, this hooking up the Iranians with weapons. One last guy, another Jew, Richard Pearl, Senate Armed Services Committee under Reagan and Bush. He went to Hollywood High School. He was a classmate of Will Ferrell. You know Will Ferrell, we know he's a pedo. Anyway, he was part of the Armed Services Committee and the Defense Policy Board, but he also belonged to the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. Here's a good one. The Bilderberger Group, and he's also connected to a company called HP. Now, this is part of the computer company HP, but it's called HP Autonomy. And these guys are global data collectors. In other words, they're collecting data on all of us. What's that for? And he's the director of the Jerusalem Post, or was. And he was also involved with another company called Hollinger International that got busted for $5 million SEC violations. And he's such a war hawk, he's completely in opposition to nuclear arms reduction. And what's interesting, and this is why when we get back to the Queen's group, you'll see how this incestuous relationship. But he was a lobbyist for Hong Kong. He took $600,000 from Hong Kong, China, to lobby for them. And in 2006, he was an advisor to none other than Muammar Gaddafi. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that. Again, my name is Stephen Kelley. This is I'm sorry, not SK Industries, but the Truth Cat Radio, the Stephen D. Kelley Show. And this is part 2, and I believe this is going to be the final chapter. We'll go back and expand on some things like the 88 Queensway group. And for this, we're going to sign off. So good night, God bless, adios, and goodbye.